go to Jay.
Sure.
So I met Jay. I lived on a little street called Hillside Drive. I lived downstairs from a guy called Jim Dixon, who handled the Birds and a lot of other acts. And he had a young woman living with him called, in those days she was known as Kathy. Well, her name is Kathy James, but her mother was married to Travis, Bud and Travis. What were their last names? Bud and Travis. Travis Edmondson. So she was Kathy Edmondson those days, okay? So she came down one day. They lived upstairs. And she came down and she said, my boyfriend is throwing a Sweet 16 birthday party for me. And I want to have a lot of celebrities there. Can you get me some celebrities? And, oh, do you want to come to my party? And I said, sure. So at that very moment, or a few minutes later, I got on the phone and she told me who her boyfriend was. I'd never heard of him. And so I called the shop, and Carlene, was that her name?
Yeah, Carlene McCaffrey. I was going to ask you about her too.
Well, Carlene answered, and I said, hello, this is Sharmeign Leland St John. I'm Catherine Edmonds' social secretary. And I was wondering, I'd like to have the numbers of, some people to invite to her party. And I gave her a list. And she said, what? View those numbers. And I said, well, I'm sorry, would you please run this by Mr. Sebring, because I'm certain he would want these people at Kathy's party. And so later she came back on and gave me a list of names, George Hamilton, and I don't remember the other ones, but for sure George Hamilton was one of them. And I had numbers of other people, which I called, that I got from the celebrity register, right?
Right.
So now we're waiting for her mother to come and fetch us. And at that moment, my former boyfriend walks in the door. And I know we had broken up and I had thrown a pie plate at him or something. And so he cautiously came in the door. And I said, oh, this is my former boyfriend. And so he wanted something. I don't remember, something that he had left there or something. And finally, it's getting later and later, and Kathy said, we need a ride. Can he take us up to Jay's? And so I said, will you drive us? It's Kathy's Sweet 16, and her mother isn't here. And can you drive us up to Jay's there for this party? And so he said, yeah, sure. So we got into the car. We drove up Benedict, turned right on Easton, got to the end, and we went down this flagstone stairway and into this Bavarian dream in the house. Right? Yeah. So we walked in the door and someone said, would you like some punch? It's got LSD in it. And we said, sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So we were given punch and immediately started hallucinating. And I remember standing in the kitchen for the longest time. And the kitchen was very small, and there was a big window in the back. And behind the big plate glass window, there were these, I don't know if they were real or fake, but there were ferns and all these sort of jungle-style plants.
Right.
And a rain machine. Right. So George Hamilton is standing there telling the story about when he got arrested in Mexico and how they threw him into a jail cell with this guy who apparently was a cocaine dealer. And when the door came down, he immediately took all of his stash and he went, oh, and he put it in his hair like this and rubbed it all into his hair. And now the cops come in and they can't find the dope, but they arrest him anyway. And so he spends I'm going to say 2 weeks or whatever it was. He spends the time in the jail going like this and pulling. And he keeps offering it to George, and George claims he didn't take any. But so it seemed like hours had gone by, and we're just enthralled listening to this suntanned actor telling us this story of his trials and tribulations. And then Myron, my boyfriend, Myron Shanova, a.k.a. Mike Hanover, comes in and he says to me, and he had been a henchman for Harry Cohen.
Oh, okay.
Wait, is that his name?
Cohen.
Who was the gang?
Oh, Mickey.
Mickey Cohen, right. I'm thinking of the studio boss. Mickey Cohen. He had been one of his little stoolies, right? So, stooges. And so he said, come on, we have to go. I got to go to work tomorrow. And I said, oh, no. I said, I'm going to stay. You came with me. You'll leave with me. And you wonder why I broke up with you.
Yeah.
Right? So I have to say goodbye first, to thank our host. So I went over to Jay, and I thanked him for inviting me or allowing me. And he said, oh, you're leaving? And I said, yeah, my ex-boyfriend wants to leave. And he said, I have to leave. Do you want to leave? And I said, no. He said, see that stairway? Go up the stairs. There's a door on the right. It's a bathroom. The bathroom where apparently George Byrne, what was his name?
George
Paul
Byrne,
Byrne
yeah.
was from.
Paul Byrne.
Oh, no,
That's
Paul
it.
Byrne.
Yeah,
Paul
yeah.
Byrne. Oh, I get my names mixed up. So anyway, I said, okay. He says, go in the bathroom and lock the door. And I said, okay. So I went up. I said to my guy, I said, I have to use the loo. So I went up the stairs and I opened the door, went in, locked it, and I heard a bit of commotion downstairs. And apparently a bunch of guys just went over and said, you're leaving. And he said, no, I'm waiting. No, you're not. You're leaving. And he refused to leave, and they picked him up and threw him out the door. And apparently he then started pounding on the door, and there was a fist fight that ensued. So he went to my family's house at 3 a.m. and told them I was at a drug-induced orgy in the home. Some guy woke them up, right?
Yeah.
So the next thing I know, it didn't happen immediately, but Jay called me and said that Kathy had given him my number, and Kathy had decided to go to New York, to Greenwich Village, because she wanted to meet Bob Dylan, because she had been over at the McLaren home. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
It's a home for kids who either their parents have thrown them out, or they've been caught doing, stealing or whatever, and they wind up, it's kind of like a juvenile detention in a way.
Okay.
Or an orphanage. It's kind of a cross between the two. Anyway, so Kathy had been in that place, and she had finally escaped. She only went to about the 3rd grade.
Okay.
Brilliant, wonderful person. I still am in touch with Kathy.
Okay.
And so she had met Dylan when his road manager, Victor Mamutis, had gone to pick her up one day at the home, and they went driving around, and this guy in the car was named Bob, Bob Dylan, right? And so he said, if you ever get to New York, look me up. I'm going to go to the Greenwich Village. And she said, okay. So now she thought, well, I think I'll go to the Greenwich Village and meet. So she gave Jay my phone number. He rang, and then my parents showed up at my doorstep and wanted to have me go and see a psychiatrist, right? And I don't want to go and see a psychiatrist. They said, no, you should go and see a psychiatrist. So I said, well, all right. So I go, and there's this guy, and apparently someone told him that when I was a baby, I used to bounce balls of paper around on my feet, and when my sister tried to comb my hair, I smacked her with the comb because she pulled my hair. So there must be something wrong with me, right? So, and then I found out why they were doing it. It takes 2 psychiatrists to get you committed. So I said, no, I'm not going to another psychiatrist. No, I'm not going to do that. So my dad had built a yacht, and at that point, it wasn't the one he built. He had bought a yacht, and he invited me to go out on the weekend. And there was another couple there called Julie, and I don't remember the husband's name. And they had invited my former boyfriend to go, trying to get us back together. And then there was my stepmother, my father, and I don't even know who else. And I immediately didn't like the guy that was there. He was one of those kind of, so I was just mind fucking with him, right?
Yeah, sure.
Being as mean and rude as I could, and but it turned out he was a psychiatrist. And so then they went and told me that they wanted to take me to Camarillo. And I said, well, I'm not going to Camarillo. And they said, well, you can either go in voluntarily and then you can check yourself at any time. But if we have you committed, then you're going to be stuck there.
Jeez.
And so I said, geez. So I said, okay. So I packed up a few things and off we went to Camarillo, which eventually I escaped. And the first person I called was Jay. And I said what had happened. And I had left a note in the mailbox for Jim Dixon, and it said, "Help, parents have carted me off to Camarillo."
Oh,
so he
man.
called Peter Yarrow, whom I had been dating, and Jay used to cut Peter's hair. And so Peter tried to intervene and get me out. I went, and it was over a 4th of July weekend, so no doctors were on staff. I spent the weekend there. My ex-boyfriend shows up, and he's weeping. "How could I have done this to you?" And so, well, I've escaped. I've called Jay, and he said, "Well, you can't come here because it's the first place they'll look for you. I'm going to make a phone call. Where are you?" And I told him. I was in some bookie joint on the corner of, what was it, Coldwater Canyon and Riverside or something, where I knew a friend of mine who used to be the girlfriend of Max Baer Jr. She had lived in that apartment, and I thought maybe her roommate was still there. I knocked on the door, and it's a bookie joint, and they didn't want to let me in to use the phone, but I said, "I have to. You've got to. I know what's going on here. I'm not going to say anything, please." I just am real,
Right.
So I wait there, and Jay sends a guy named Norman who worked in the shop. They take me out to Sunland or Tahunga somewhere and put me in Norman's mother's house. So eventually, I keep calling the police. I go down the street to a payphone. I call the police and I tell them that I know where this escaped fugitive from Camarillo. She's at her parents' apartment, and they can go and get her. So, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm just interview, honey. Okay, love you. See you soon." So they go to my parents' house at 3 a.m. and bang on the door, and "We're here to pick up Sharmaine." "Well, she's not here." So they leave. So I call back half an hour later. I said, "I'm the neighbor. She's there. I saw her go in. She's probably hiding under the bed." So they go back at 4 o'clock and bang on the door. It's a couple of mornings in a row. Because I remember a woman said to me at Camarillo, "I think that's horrible what your parents did to you." And I said, "What did they do to me?" And she said, "I was in Dr. York's office when he called and told them to come and get you. There's nothing wrong with you. And they refused to get you." That's when I escaped, right? So anyway, flash forward. So I'm at Norman's house. Finally, I find out that they've gone and they've lifted the APB on me, and I'm no longer a fugitive, a crazy fugitive.
Right.
So then I think I had given up the apartment. So I wound up somehow back at my parents' apartment, and then Peter Yarrow came into town and went there, and he just laid them out and said, "If you ever do anything like that again, and if there's ever a problem, you call me and I will take care of her." And so I don't remember where I went from their apartment, but I guess that's when I moved in with Jay.
Right.
Because there was no apartment in between. And I guess Jay and I had gone out. We'd gone out one night, and I remember it was so crazy. We went to the Daisy, which was the private club, and on the way home to his house, I remember he was driving. He was going about 100 miles an hour up Benedict Canyon.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, my parents would never approve of this." And he said to me when we pulled into the driveway, he said to me, "Well, that was Benedict Canyon." 3 minutes from the Daisy to his house. Literally 3 minutes.
Wow.
And so he invited me to come and live with him. So he had broken up with Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
He had then seen Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he started seeing me. And I moved in with him. And I remember, and Sharon was still a very close friend of ours.
Yeah.
She came over frequently. I remember one time we were by the pool, and Bruce Lee showed up. And he had Sharon to the point where she could almost break boards with her hands.
Wow.
Doing kung fu. And he was teaching her so she could start doing a lot of the Bond movies or the Dean Martin movies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of karate and those things and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember he put a dime in his hand and said, "Take the dime out of my hand." And I reached over, and I mean, he was so quick. And I thought I had the dime, and I didn't. And his reflexes were like a cat.
Right.
Incredible. So one of the things that happened, I mentioned Steve McQueen. While I had only been there well, let me think. I'd been there a long time. I'd lived there for a long time, and I came home one day, and we had been burgled. And there was stuff strewn all up and down the flagstone stairway, my stuff, and some of Jay's stuff. And I went into the house, and it had been, what's the word, dabbled, which is distraction, totally, upside down. And I went to the phone and I called Jay. He was in Vegas cutting Frank's hair, and Frank Sinatra, and I said, we've been burglarized. And he said, oh my God. He said, well, don't go in the house. I said, I'm in the house. He said, get out of the house. Get out of the house right now. I'm going to call my best friend. He's going to come and he'll help you. Hang up the phone. Get out of the house. All right. Hung up the phone. I ran out of the house, stepping over my belongings as I'm going up the stairs. A few minutes later, I hear, vroom, vroom, vroom. And this gorgeous blonde guy comes driving up on a motorcycle. And it's Steve McQueen. And he says, hey, he said, you all right? I said, yeah. And he had a gun.
Right.
And I said, well, I'm all right. And he said, well, Jay just called me. I'm Steve McQueen. I'm Steve. I don't think he said his last. He said, I'm Steve. I'm one of his close friends. And I'm like, okay. And so he comes down the stairs. He's picking up our things. He says, Jay asked me to come and help get everything back into the house and make sure the house is empty, so you wait here. So he went in and came out, clear, right? And so I went back into the house, and we put everything that we could back where it needed to be. And then he said, Jay said that I could stay the night, that I should stay the night to protect you. He'll be home in the morning. Is that all right with you? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, we stayed the night, and in the morning, Jay came back, and it turned out someone, oddly enough, named Carol Kennedy, he knew who had burglarized us somehow. And so I still was in the house for a short time, but then he was worried that when he was away all the time on the weekends, because he would go and do hair. He'd go to Atlantic City, or he'd fly to Vegas, or he'd Frisco or somewhere. So we decided that I would take a little house or an apartment somewhere, and then I would live during the week at the Harlow house, Sebring house, and then on the weekends, if Jay was away, I would go down to this little house on Larrabee that I rented. I believe I was working at that time for Jim Dixon, who had been my former landlord. And so another incident that happened. Oh, I remember when we used to always tell Polish jokes to Roman. Tell me Polish joke. Yeah. And so we'd always, okay, this is what I wanted to tell you. So everyone has said they were into witchcraft. Mm-hmm. John Phillips and Michelle Phillips were heavily into witchcraft and voodoo. Okay. We used to, a lot of weekends when he was in town, we'd go up on a Friday or Saturday night and spend a lot of time at their home in the music room. They had the old Jeanette MacDonald, Gordon, what was his name? Gordon, somebody, that house, those two famous actors. And it was a huge house in Bel Air, a mansion with a moat around it. Oh, wow. Perfect for John and Mitchie, right? So we'd spend a lot of time, and that little guy, Steve Brandt, was always there. Genevieve was there. Marcia Trinder was always there. She and her boyfriend, Yippee, had done the costumes for hair.
Oh, wow.
So that whole thing. And so, and here's another interesting, I'll get to that later. Remind me about Michael Butler. And so we would go up, and they had this drink called Deadly Nightshade. Okay. And we never knew what was in it. But it got you drunk and high all at the same time. Right. And give us the recipe. I was always so disappointed that I couldn't have the recipe. And so we'd go up there, and we'd go over to Peter Lawford's if he was in. Usually we'd go over there on a Thursday because Jay would be going away on the weekend, and Peter would have a dinner in his home almost weekly, and then he would have it catered by I want to say La Dolce Vita. Okay. Which was a restaurant on Little Santa Monica, Brighton Way, somewhere around there. And I remember one time someone saying, I said something about I was going to make a plate for Peter. And the guy just started loading stuff on. And then I said, here, Peter, I made this plate for you. He said, you like this? And Peter said, yeah, but not by the shitload. And so we'd go down and hang out with Peter and other people that would come around there. Oh, Simone Hezra, who's still alive. Mr. Hitami, who's now gone. Brian Morris, who's now gone. Alex Cord, who I think either is not still alive or has dementia. He would be up at the house a lot. In fact, I remember one time we used to have parties on the Saturdays when Jay wasn't away. And I remember Alex was lying down on the living room floor and I was sitting on top of him and I was giving him a massage. And he had to leave to go to the airport to pick up his pregnant fiancée, Joanna. And so he went off to pick up his fiancée. And years later, we found out that baby wasn't even his.
Oh, no.
Or somebody. Yeah. And anyway, so, and I'm trying to think of who else. There were people who I don't even know their names or didn't even remember their names, just a lot of people that I didn't know, but Jay knew. And we always seemed to have a party going on. Right. It's like Jay didn't like alone. Right. Or he just, and, or we'd go to the Chateau Marmont. We spent a lot of time at the Chateau Marmont. Sharon and Roman had taken an apartment there, and then Simone and Brian, I think, shared an apartment, and I believe Mr. Atami had a place there too. And I remember one time I went to a party, at a very small party, because it was just that little group, that inner group, and we went to their apartment, and there was a potted plant sitting on a wicker chair. And Sharon went into the kitchen and came back with a pitcher with water, and she poured some water into it. Poured and poured. It was empty, and she went back and got some more. And someone said to me, "How long do you think it'll take before she realizes it's leaking out through the chair onto the carpet below?"
Oh no.
So Sharon was lovely. Sharon was one of the kindest human beings I've ever met. I remember one time she rang and asked for Jay, and I said, "He's not here. He's at the shop." And she said, "You sound stressed. What's the matter?" And I said, "I've got this interview and I don't know what to wear." And she said, "What's it for?" And it was for. And she showed up minutes later with a plaid skirt and jacket and a little blue blouse. And it was Black Watch or one of those tartan fabrics. And she said, "Here, wear this." And I got, whatever it was, I got the commercial.
Oh, wow.
It might have been the Clairol, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, or Days Pants or GM, one of those, but I got the commercial. And in fact, I had that dress forever, that skirt, mini, little tiny mini. I wore the mini skirt to her funeral, but not the jacket, because it was the dead of summer heat. And and the funerals happened so quickly, there was no time to go and buy something. And so, that was that. Now, Michael Butler, the night of the murders, John Phillips showed up at Michael Butler's house on 1890 Rising Glen Road, pounding on the gate, screaming, yelling, pounding, trying to get in. And nobody was letting him in. He somehow climbed up and got onto the carport and jumped down into the yard, and then went and started banging on the front door. And it was the old house where Blake Edwards and Julie had lived. And they also had the house next door, which they used as an office. So John is screaming that there's been a murder. So I think he went up to Cielo Drive and saw the bodies and freaked out and left. Because years later, Mama Cass stole his story.
Okay.
And was telling that he had gone up to the house.
Right. I'd heard the Mama Cass one, and then just not super recently, but more recently than that, I'd heard somebody had said that it was John Phillips that had been going around and yelling about it. Who did you hear that from?
Well, from Michael Butler, and I have him on tape.
Oh, wow.
Michael's gone now. He passed away a couple of years ago. Michael became my boyfriend years later. But this is interesting also. When Roman and Sharon... Oh, wait a minute. Let me go back to Michael. So now John is out there hysterical, and Michael says to him, "You got to quit this voodoo shit. You got to walk away from this black magic crap, because it's dangerous. It's very dangerous." And so this was in the nighttime before Winnie, our maid, went up and found them. So Years later, Michael told me that he had a conversation with Roman about trading houses. Okay. Roman loved Rising Glen, and Michael loved the simplicity of this ranch house. And they were going to trade. And Roman said, wait till I get back from Europe, and we'll do it when I get back from Europe.
Right.
And Michael, well, no, why don't you do it now? Because, Sharon's pregnant, you'll want to put together a nursery, and you don't want to, and Sharon was already planning a nursery at that house. Right. So he said, you should do it now before you go away and that. And then Roman or someone said, no, we'll wait until we get back.
I wanted to ask you something, because I've been working with people that are writing a book about the Tate Sebring LaBianca murder.
Well, which one?
The Sharon Tate murder.
Oh, yeah.
And you told me one time that Roman wanted to trade you
for... trade houses.
How did that come about? What?
It didn't come about.
Okay.
He went to Europe.
He went to Europe.
And that's when the murder took place.
Okay, so...
He was in Europe when she was murdered.
Right. He was with Richard.
Yeah.
My husband. So you were going to trade houses, but then he left to go to Europe, so it didn't happen.
Well, we were talking about it.
Okay.
I liked very much that house. It was more of a country attitude. My Rising Glen was much more formal, and never.
And then after the murders, John Phillips came to your house that night.
That's right.
Was it that night or the next day?
I think it was that night.
Do you remember what time?
Oh, quite late. Pounding on the gate. Remember, there was originally there was an outside gate. I changed some of that. And pounding on the gate. And when he got in, I kept my lecturing. I had been lecturing him all along to stop fooling around with black magic. Because there was a whole group, and John was very much part of it, who were really into the black magic department.
Was Jay part of it?
What?
Was Jay part of it?
Jay Sebring?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Jay was my boyfriend.
Oh, I did not know that.
Was that John Philip Law you're talking about?
No, John Phillips.
Okay.
And didn't he try ringing the gate but didn't get in and climbed up over the garage or something and climbed? Didn't John climb and scale?
He was climbing up the top.
Yeah, to get in.
We let him in.
He was terrified.
Yeah, absolutely terrified.
So it must have been after the news was already on the TV and the radio. So it was the night of the 9th. Wait, they were killed?
It could have been the night after.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It was during that time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of black magic here in those days.
Wow.
Otherwise, Michael been at that house that night.
Right. Man.
Right. Oh, I remember what I was doing at that point. I was working for Harry Falk. Okay. I had met Harry at the factory, and Harry had a brother who had either, what's the kissing disease? Mononucleosis. He either had HEP or mononucleosis. And Harry hired me to come and make breakfast and lunch for him and to just be at the house during the day in case he needed some kind of help. And so I was doing that. And Harry lived just a block off Hollywood Boulevard and Laurel Canyon on a street called Fairholme, 8046 Fairholme. And so I was doing that. And I remember the Friday of the murders, I had a front row box at the Hollywood Bowl that Peter had given me for Peter, Paul, and Mary concert. And I had invited Joanna and Alex, and they had said, oh yes, they'd love to go. They were just so excited about it. I was excited. And then I didn't have anyone else who was going. And at the last possible moment, they called me and said, oh, Janine Foreman is having a party for Joey Foreman tonight, and it's a surprise party, and so we can't go to the bowl. And I said, no, we've been planning this for 2 weeks. I have a front row center box, 6 seats. I would look ridiculous sitting there all by myself.
Right.
And Jay had been up in San Francisco. But I called the house, And he actually answered, and I said, "Oh, you're back." He said, "Yeah, I just got in." And I said, "Well, I've got a problem here. I've got this box at the bowl. Peter's given, I know you cut Peter's hair and you guys are friendly. And do you want to come to the concert?" He said, "I'm jet lagged. I think I'm just going to take it easy tonight, but call later after the concert and maybe come home or come tomorrow and swim and weekend, because I have to leave on Monday." He was supposed to, I think, go to Vegas. I'm not sure though. He was supposed to go somewhere, either Saturday night or Sunday or Monday. Anyway, so I said, "Okay, I'll call you after the concert." So then I called Carol Gandler, a Peter, Paul, and Mary groupie, and invited her, and she came. So we went. Harry came home from the studio. He was doing a TV show. He came home from the studio, and I was at his house. And so I just left from his house and went with him to the concert. And I remember during the last song, he said, "Okay, we need to go." And I said, No, there's going to be an encore, and I have backstage passes." "No," he said, "if we don't go right now, we'll get stuck in traffic. I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning, and you need a ride home." And so I guess Carol didn't drive. And so I said, "Oh, okay. All right." And so we left. He dropped me off at my little house on Larrabee, 1006 Larrabee. And I called Jay, and our answering service answered. And I said, "Hey, it's Sharmagne. Let him know that the concert's over and I'm at the Larrabee house." And she said, "Okay." And it was Teddy O'Toole. That's who our answering service was. And so then I fell asleep eventually. Jay didn't call. And then I woke up in the morning and I went up to Harry's and made breakfast for them. And then Harry ran off to the gym. And Tommy came down a little bit later. And I know the phone had rung. And then he came down. And apparently Harry had called and said, "Do not let her turn on the TV or listen to the radio. They think that Jay and Sharon have just been murdered." And then he said, "I'm going to call back, go down to the kitchen and answer the phone and give it." Because he said, "Where is she?" "She's down in the kitchen." So Tommy Fall came down, and then the phone rang and he picked it up and he said, "It's for you, it's Harry." And I thought, how does he know that? And so he handed me the phone. I remember I had my back to the sink. I turned around and it was a phone on the wall that had the long curly cord. Do you remember those? No.
Oh yeah, I do, yeah, for sure.
I get on the phone and Harry says, "They're not sure, but I'm watching the news. Sharon has been murdered and they think that Jay was with her." And I remember just sliding down my back against the sink, sliding down, and suddenly I was sitting on the floor. Man. And just numb and shocked. And so finally Tommy came and took the phone from me. And what can I do? And I said, dial our home, dial our number. And so he dialed the number, and Teddy O'Toole answered. And I said, "This is Sharmagne. Did Jay come home last night?" They said, "We know, we can't tell you that." And I said, "But I live with him." And she said, "Still, we can't tell you." I said, "Okay, can you tell me this? Did he pick up my message from last night?" She said, "Just a minute." So she said, "No, it's still here." And then I knew he was gone. Jay had a beeper. We didn't have cell phones in those days.
Right.
He had a pager, and he would check that pager every 15 minutes to see if there was something more exciting going on.
Right.
I mean, we would leave to go to another. We'd be in the middle of Peter Lawford's, and he'd say, "We got to go. Peter, we got to go." And I said, "Where are we going?" "We're going up to John and Mitchie's. Something's going on up there." And so he checked in every 15 minutes. When I knew that he hadn't picked up my message, I knew he was gone.